You're watching Laughing Moment. I hope your day is great. Well, why is that hallway dark? Should probably put you over there. A little bit, you can see, yeah. I did not realize the kitchen's so dark. Like, what if I do this? Does that help out? Okay. That helps out the good stuff in this world. We are reading Chapter 2 because of Winn, Dixie. We left off Chapter 1. Recap Chapter 1. Skip, put timelines, timestamps in the video because, well, heaven knows I talk too much. Recap Chapter 1. Kate, wait, you always go back just to see what the name is. India, just do her name. India ended up going to Winn Dixie grocery store and then sawing a dog. The dog then almost went to the pound, but then the girl actually took the dog because she didn't want to go to the pound, and now it's hers, and now they're going to go see what happens with the preacher in her. So this ought to be interesting and ought to be good for a Chapter 2 inside of a book. Chapter 2. That summer I found Winn Dixie was also the summer me and the preacher moved to Naomi, Florida, so he could be the new preacher at the Open Arms Baptist Church of Naomi or something, I don't know. My daddy is a good preacher and a nice man, but sometimes it's hard for me to think about him as my daddy because he spends so much time preaching or thinking about preaching or getting ready to preach. And also in my mind, I think of him as the preacher. Before I was born, he was a missionary in India, and that is how I got my first name. But he calls me by my second, Opel, I think. Yeah. Name, Opel, because that was his mother's name, and he loved her a lot. Anyway, while me and Winn Dixie walked home, I told him how I got my name, and I told him how I had just moved to Naomi. I say Naomi. Except that might be wrong. I also told him about the preacher and how he was a good man, even if he was too distracted with ceremonies and prayers and suffering people to go grocery shopping. But you know what? I told him, Dixie, you are a suffering dog, so maybe he will take you the right way. Maybe he'll let me keep you. When Dixie looked at me and wagged his tail, he was kind of limping, like something was wrong with one of his legs. I had to admit, he stunk bad. He was an ugly dog, but all ready, and I loved him with all my heart. When he got to the Friendly Corners trailer park, I told Winn Dixie that he had to behave right and be quiet because this was an all-adult trailer park, and the only reason I got to live in it was because the preacher was a preacher, and I was a good, quiet kid. I was what the Friendly Corners trailer park manager, Mr. Afraid, called an exception, and I told Winn Dixie he had to act like an exception too. Especially, I told him not to pick any fights with Mrs. Afraid's cats or Mr. Detweller's little yappy Yorkie dog. Samuel Winn Dixie looked up at me while I was telling him everything, and I swear he understood. Sit, I told him when he got to my trailer. He sat right down. He had good manners. Stay here, I told him. I'll be right back. The preacher was sitting in his living room. Not in his, because, it is his, so you can't say it. Working at the little full-out table, he had papers spread all around him, and he was rubbing his nose, which always means he is thinking hard. Daddy, I said. Mm-hmm. He said back, Daddy, do you know how you always tell me that we should help those less fortunate than ourselves? Mm-hmm. He said. He rubbed his nose and looked around at his papers. Well, I said, I found a less fortunate grocery store. Is that right? He said. Yes, sir. I told him. I stared at the preacher really hard. Sometimes he reminded me of a turtle hiding inside its shell, and there thinking about things and not ever sticking his head out in the world. Daddy, I was wondering, could this less fortunate could he stay with us for a while? Finally, the preacher looked at me up hell. He said, "What are you talking about?" "I found a dog," I told him, "and I want to keep him." "No dogs," the preacher said. "We've talked about this before. You don't need a dog." "I know," I said. "I know I don't need a dog, but this dog needs me. Look," I said. I went to the trailer door and I hollered, "Winn, Dixie." Winn Dixie's ears shot up in the air and he grinned and sneezed. And then he came limping up the steps and into the trailer. And he put his head right in the preacher's lap, right on the top of a pile of papers. The preacher looked at Winn Dixie. He looked at his ribs and his matted up fur and the places where he was bald. The preacher's nose wrinkled up. Like I said, the dog smelled pretty bad. When Dixie looked up at the preacher, he just pulled back his lips and showed the preacher all of his crooked yellow teeth and wagged his tail and knocked some of the preacher's papers off the table. Then he sneezed and some more papers fluttered to the floor. "What did you call this dog?" the preacher asked. "Winn Dixie," I whispered. I was afraid to say anything too loud. I could see that Winn Dixie was having a good effect on the preacher. He was making him poke his head out of his shell. "Well," said the preacher, "he's a stray, if I've ever seen one." He put down his pencil and scratched Winn Dixie behind the ears, and a less fortunate too, that's for sure. "Are you looking for a home?" the preacher asked real softly to Winn Dixie. Winn Dixie wagged his tail. "Well," the preacher said, "I guess you found one." That is it for Chapter 3. Click here if you want to see me read Chapter 1. Click over here if you want me to show you what this new channel is going to be about, or the official channel's name and, content. Click right here to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Boom, boom, you're watching Laughing Moment. It's the end of Chapter 2. It's the end of Chapter 2. Baby, it's the end of Chapter 2, end of Chapter 2, end of Chapter 2. We are a happy family, reading the book of Because of Winn Dixie, perfect time, perfect year for reading books, that's for sure. So let's sit down and we'll read together, hashtag we will read together, hashtag we will read together, hashtag we will read together, we will read together, we will read together, that's right baby, we will read together, yeah, together, baby we will, there's no stopping it. We'll read together, hashtag we will 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 read together. Subscribe to Laughing Moment.